and professionals gathered here. I welcome you all to the world's biggest digital space conference this year, organized by SDNx and Helium Learning Labs. My name is Pallavi, and I'm an intern at SDNx and Helium Learning Labs and your host for the session. I'm sure we are all diverse in a lot of aspects, but we need to acknowledge what has brought us here together, and that is our love and enthusiasm for space. This year's theme, the role of space education and research in emerging nations, was adopted to put a spotlight on the space activities in emerging nations and empower them further. We expect that throughout the summit, the students and young professionals can get guidance with their education and career. SDNx Foundation was established in the year 2013 with the purpose of making space accessible to everyone through its initiatives and educational projects. Helium Learning Labs, who are our organizing partner, are an edtech company that aims to establish a world-class digital space school to fill the gap between space education and space industry, to train students for the future space workforce. There is history in making in Uganda at the moment, and we have someone who is working very closely to fulfill this vision. Our speaker, Mr. Kasibante David, is a lawyer based in Uganda, a space enthusiast, lover of all things computer, retired hacker, and aspiring space entrepreneur. He has made his mark as the first of his kind in Uganda and even East and Central Africa, with a zeal for realizing the space potential for the area. Mr. Kasibante leads a team of space enthusiasts and young professionals at a startup, Space for Tomorrow, that is working with the Ugandan government and other stakeholders to realize the full potential of youth and space sciences, law and policy through research and development in the space sector. He also represents Uganda at the United Nations Space Generation Advisory Council. In his free time, Mr. Kasibante looks up at the skies above and sees hope and borders, and he hopes everyone gets to see that. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the session to Mr. David to take up further with his presentation. Mr. Kasibante, over to you. Mr. David, we cannot hear you. Could you turn your mic on? Mr. David, we cannot hear you. Can you turn your mic on? Mr. David, are you there? We cannot hear you.
Thank you very much for having me, Pallavi, the team, the SDNx. Not here. Can you hear me now? Yes, I am.
Yes, sir, we can hear you. Yeah, we can hear you.
Pallavi, can you confirm that you can hear me now? Okay. Just here too. All right. Well, perfect. I was wondering what was happening. Okay, as I was saying earlier, I'm very grateful that you've had me today. My session today is mostly going to be focusing on the role of space education and research in fostering development in developing nations around the world. And
so your audio is lagging.
The main focus here is going to be basically what can space education and research do that can help to lift the economy of developing countries. Yes. So my main a few other ones not here to be unintended impediments or giving there was at the end of the day, and these impediments are related to misconceptions about faith and misconceptions about what faith can achieve. That's going to be the crux of my discussion today. So, all right. So, I want you to confirm that you can still see my screen so that I can now proceed with the rest of the discussion. Yes. Yes, I can hear you. Yes, I can hear you. Okay. Let me repeat. Just give me a second.
All right, so I just switched my devices, so just confirm that I'm now clear.
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
All right, fine. Thank you very much. I think I'll just use this device to make my presentations from now on.
Helium
All right,
Learning
so
Labs, your mic is on. Could you please turn it off, your mic?
the mic.
Someone who's accessing. Yeah, okay. Now you can go ahead, please, Mr. David.
Thank you very much. So as I was saying earlier, that I'm going to focus on the role of space education and research in developing nations. And as part of my presentation, I'm going to try to undo certain misconceptions that are known in the area of space and space education, for that matter. So in this instance, first of all, I think it's important for us to first see and define what exactly do we understand by research? The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines it as a critical and exhaustive investigation or experimentation. And it has its aim for discovery of new facts. Now, the key words here is a discovery of new facts and a revision of accepted conclusions, theories, or laws in light of newly discovered facts and or the practical application of such revised conclusions, theories, or laws. So the whole purpose of research and education is mostly to undo or to confirm certain certain concepts and biases. And in many instances, when you look at research in its raw form, it seeks to revise particular conclusions or to even to see their applicability. So how about space education? So space education basically is the act or the process of providing with knowledge, skill, competence in the understanding of space, its resources, threats, and opportunities. So space education is not all about simply going to class and sitting and reading something about space, but rather to grow skills and competences in understanding space. And this includes its resources, the threats, and the opportunities that it presents. So once we understand that this is the whole concept of space education, then let's see education in developing nations. What is the trend? What is it in developing nations? Now, you may understand that the United Nations and even the World Bank does not have a definition for what a developing country or developing nation is. So they tend to look at developing nations, developing countries as based on their Human Development Index. So Wikipedia sort of looks at developing nations or developing countries to be countries which are less developed industry, with a less developed industrial base and a low HDI relative to other countries. So the World Bank categorizes developing nations or development in 4 broad categories: most developed, upper middle income, lower middle income, and low income. And this spectrum, usually the last 2, that is low middle income and low income, are usually categorized as developing nations for the purposes. So for the purposes of this discussion, we shall look mostly at that particular definition of developing nations. So let's look at some of the insights into these education systems. For this presentation, I'm going to mostly rely on 3 key countries on 3 different continents. So from Latin America and from Africa, and then from Asia. I'll just pick 1 country from each continent to basically highlight what insight can we get from its education system. So from Latin America, we're looking at Guatemala, and Guatemala basically spends, and one of the threads that we will see in all these other entities is the thread of the fact that expenditure on education in most of these countries is really low. So Guatemala spends 2.8% of its GDP in education, and that's way below the regional average, you know. And basically, there is poor government effectiveness and corruption, which impede internal efficiency, you know, of the system, and it depresses the learning outcomes of the students. Some of the challenges that they face include quality in education, coverage, teacher training, gender and ethnic disparities. And we are also going to see in the other sample countries that these are pretty common aspects that we are going to be seeing largely. On the side, you can see basically expenditure on education as a percentage of the total government expenditure in Guatemala from 2010 to 2016. And so from the Latin American continent, let's now look at a different country. And this is now in Africa. I'll focus on my own country, Uganda. So in Uganda, basically, the government considers education as a basic human right. It's embedded in the constitution, and it's an enabling laws that basically point to education as you know, as a basic human right in Uganda. And most interestingly, in the country, education is viewed as part of the solution to reducing poverty. Notably, Uganda has one of the highest poverty rates on the continent and even in the world. And but the government is dedicated to providing equitable access to quality and affordable education to all Ugandans, with a nationally rolled out system of universal primary education and even universal secondary education. However, there are challenges to achieving great education in Uganda. And these include high levels of teacher and student absenteeism, weak school level management structures, inadequate availability of learning materials, and among others. And these are some of the issues that affect the Ugandan education system. Moving on to the other place, we are going to look at Asia, and here we'll focus on Bangladesh. So in Bangladesh, education and learning is offered through both formal and non-formal channels, and this is one of the countries in the world where non-formal channels are also part of the official education system, and basically the formal education system also has the pre-primary, then primary, secondary, and then technical vocational education, like most countries, and then tertiary education, which is higher learning. However, one of the problems that faces the Bangladeshi education system, again, we're going to see problems of gender disparity and governmental programs which reduce expenditure on education, and then of course we'll also see the problems with the pedagogies in teaching in Bangladesh, and again some of these issues are cross-cutting among almost every single developing nation on the radar. So what can we observe from these education systems? There are three key things that can be observed, or that show up, or that come up in these whatevers, and those three things include one, very highly theoretical pedagogies. Pedagogies are teaching methods that are adopted by teachers in order to carry out teaching. Very, very highly theoretical pedagogies. That's one of the things that shows up in almost every education system of developing nations. And then we have very low learner retention. By this, we mean that very few learners leave or stay in the education system at the different stages. For example, the number of students that leave the primary stage is greatly reduced by the number of students that get to join the secondary stage. So students drop through the sieves of the system on the primary stage, and then the secondary stage, and then even the tertiary stage. So you'll find that when you look at the graph of learner retention, it is very broad at the bottom and very tapered at the top, because very few students get to go through the system to finish through to the end. And then the other observation is that there is very little impact of the education system on general national development. So you find that the development of the nation is not greatly impacted by the education system. So the products that the system produces are very they do not reflect the education system on the ground. So that means very few students in most of these developing nations ever get to practice their trade, or the thing that they studied for in school. Often you find that in most developing nations, and here I'm looking at Uganda specifically, the big percentage of the workforce is in fact not practicing or carrying out economic activity in the thing that they studied for. So now, let us contrast this heavily with some of the states that have invested in space education. The first example I'll give is the United States of America. In this, a 2009 study in the journal Nature found that the Apollo program, now the Apollo program was the program which launched America to the moon. It had inspired half of the scientists that were surveyed, and almost 90% believed that manned space exploration inspired younger generations to study science. In fact, many of the students and the graduates who hold bachelor's degrees in science and engineering fields peaked in the late 1960s. So further studies show that in the United States, the students, most of the students that take up science-related subjects tend to have a bias towards applicable sciences and STEM applicability, especially in the area of space applications, which is now one of the budding areas. So you find that the United States invests very, very heavily in space education. And United States universities are also some of the most acclaimed universities that teach applicable space subjects. And in this instance, I also put some of the companies that you'll find in the United States. Some of us may be well versed with them: ULA, SpaceX, Rocket Lab, Blue Origin, and all these companies that are dealing in, these are mostly private companies that are dealing in space-related matters. And then on the other side, on the total flip side, we see China on this other side. And China also is beginning to heavily invest in its space education. And the most interesting thing about China is that most of the China space ed started 2014, 2016, really. That's when China started really heavily investing in space education. And you can see that the dividends are quite visible with the Chinese space, the Chinese space industry and even its education system. Famously, China, Japan, and South Korea also heralded as some of the countries with the highest performance in STEM activities and space activities among students in the entire world. So China is now currently training a number of students and personnel and experts in the space sector, and really it's doing a big impact on the space industry worldwide by focusing and investing in its space sector. So you may ask yourself, why is it important? Why should a state, because we understand that space in itself, space investment in space is quite a costly venture. And one of the questions that always comes up is why? Why should a state bother? Why should anyone bother to invest in the space sector for any reason? And the answer is pretty simple. A state may not need to invest in the sector fully or in the space sector itself, but a small investment in the space, a small investment in the education system may change an entire system, an entire economy wholly. I'll give you just a simple example. From the analysis of the failures that we've seen in the education systems within most developing countries, there are two main categories of failures that come up. And these fall into two broad categories, pedagogies and course content. The methods of teaching and then the content that is being taught to the learners. These two form up some of the biggest problems that face most developing countries, especially when it comes to the education systems. So, space education may not be the magic bullet that's going to solve the problems of developing countries. May not be, even in Uganda, space education may not be the magic bullet, because development is really an amalgamation of a number of things that have to be done. But it can, one, diversify the course content by introducing new knowledge. Where there has been no knowledge before, that can be changed, that can be shifted, that there can be a change in diversifying the course content that many learners take up. And then it will improve learners' interest in STEM activities and subjects. Space, science, technology, engineering, math, and space. I added the last S for space. It improves learners' interest in STEM's activities and subjects, because space ed in itself is largely a STEM activity, although in other instances we have the issues of law and policy, which are now more into the sociological, but it's largely a STEM-related subject. So picking learners' interest in this is very interesting, because many, if not all, STEM-related subjects are actually very, very good at learner retention. the problems that we saw in the past, the fact that learners get bored and pedagogies are very theoretical in nature, can be cured with a small shift in the learner content, in the learner pedagogies, in introducing such a small thing as space education. Retaining learners, most STEM activities subjects tend to retain learners for longer. And because they retain learners, an introduction in the much needed practical approach to education will solve so much. Apart from just retaining learners, it will introduce a different outlook to education in most of the developing countries. Once we have this, then what? Longer learner retention within the education system, which will reduce the number of dropouts. Economy-specific education that has a direct impact on the nation's GNI. And then the human resource capacity building that is essential for a variety of other industries. All of this can be done from just a simple shift in learner content. After that, once we have these dividends starting to show up, what then do we have? Human capacity to build the different aspects of the economy, because again, space ed opens up quite a number of industries, and technological capital and innovation in various fields, which is made possible by research in space. Space is an accelerator for many other industries, such as medicine, engineering, and law. All these industries usually come up with such, because we now have different areas of space education that could be fostered in this particular area. We're looking at space medicine, we're looking at space engineering, we're looking at space law and policy. And then on top of that, we are expecting to find a diversification of the economy, which comes in with more financial inflows. Relatedly, most developing countries have a very homogeneous economy, which basically relies on very few aspects of the economy. Most times, agrarian activities, that's farming and etc., and then sometimes a mineral resource, which many times is non-renewable and very diminishing, and subject, of course, to world market values. And that always leads to very many financial instabilities and financial fluctuations and in the inflows of the country. So once we have a diversification of the economy with more financial flows, then we will have also the full utilization of various untapped resources. Notably, many developing countries, now I'm talking about Uganda in particular, have a number of untapped resources, excellent weather for launch and even observation, and even the gestationary orbit and the GSO Earth orbit. And while the location on the equator and that particular resource that comes with the fact that the country has great Earth observation and remote sensing utilities and capacities, and yet most of these are untapped. So investing in space aid may actually do quite a lot in realizing the development of various sectors of the economy. But of course, this will not come with risk factors. Notably, some of the most rampant risk factors that would come to achieving such a thing in most developing nations fall within these four categories. Gender inequalities. Notably, the most developing nations have some of the highest gender inequality levels in the world. Speaking of Uganda, gender parity in Uganda is still very, very, very far from solved or far from made equal. And this owes to the largely patriarchal and phallocentric societies in most of the developing countries, which tend to limit the ascension of women and children, of women and girls and other genders in these sectors, notably STEM sectors. And then we have the question of excessive corruption and illicit financial inflows in the countries are always a problem with realizing some of these key issues. And then we have the question of political instabilities. That's also a problem. Wars and conflict and general political instabilities, and then of course, the general lack of political will, because most of the developing nations do not find it pertinent to have some of these issues addressed, because there's a general lack of political will to do so. But how would this be solved? I'll make some propositions, and I'll make only 3 propositions. The first and most important is knowledge. Knowledge. Equip people with knowledge. Here I quote from a famous musician in Uganda, Mr. Bobby Wine. When he was singing in one of his songs, Mr. Katala, he says that people fear what they do not know, and they do not know what they fear. The fact that there is a general fear, a general lack of knowledge tends to make people fear to venture into particular areas, to come into particular systems, to change particular statuses. I also quote the Holy Book of the Christians, where it says somewhere in Hosea 4:6 that people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. And that's exactly why so many sectors are being destroyed in some of the worst hit countries in the world. So equip the people with knowledge. And this comes in many different forms. At Space for Tomorrow, for example, we're trying to do something with organizing webinars and organizing talks and organizing some of these, just basically putting information out there for the people to know and understand what space holds, And then the other is promote and foster gender parity. I insist that it's a folly for any state, for any society to believe that it can develop without developing the different genders. It's a folly. The society basically cannot develop on just the shoulders of one particular gender. Fostering gender parity and equality helps to uplift some of the most marginalized in the society. And once you foster that kind of parity, you also are, by proxy, developing the country itself. Then ensure sound accountability systems. Now, this may be a long shot, but ending corruption is probably going to be a very hard nut to crack. But if the country can try to foster and ensure a bit of accountability systems in the different areas of political development, then that helps to bring some bit of development and parity. It can help to foster some of the things that would be an impediment otherwise. So those are some of my propositions, and I thank you very much for having me. I hope that this transaction has helped to sort of help to demystify some of the key issues around education systems in developing nations, and I hope that some of the key propositions can be taken up by the powers that be to see that such development can be fostered in different developing nations. Thank you very much. Back to you, the team at Helium Labs.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. David. This was a really good PPT. I learned a lot of things. But the most important thing that I took from your presentation was the lack of knowledge. I believe that lack of knowledge is only the one thing. If it is eradicated, it will broaden the minds of people, like it will tackle the inequality as well. And the people, the students who are like discontinuing with their studies, even with knowledge, they will continue with their studies and move further on. Thank you so much, Mr. David. So further now, we'll move on to the interview session, which would last for like 15 minutes. So can we move ahead with it? Yeah.
Yes,
okay.
please.
Yeah. So first of all, could you please give us an insight on how space law and policies are different from the law on Earth?
Space law and policy different from the law on
Earth, on our planet Earth.
the law on planet Earth. Yes, you just actually mentioned the stark difference between the two. Space law is mostly engaged or concerned with what happens in outer space, what happens when states venture in outer space. And this doesn't mean that it does not also look at some of the things that happen on ground. Yeah, because it also happens to be that space law basically covers every single activity of both private and state actors in space. It's one of the branches or one of the subsets of international law as we understand it. So space land policy is quite different from what we may call municipal law, or the laws of the different countries, or just even general international law, in that for it it's mostly concerned with the activities of a state in outer space, and these include the activities in launching, preparation for launching, space exploration itself, space resource management, and all those other things. So everything relating to space, outer space, would be basically taken into the general ambit of space law, while the law of the earth and all these other laws would then cover everything else. Basically, there are a myriad of laws in that particular area. So yes, that would be the difference.
So it is almost interrelated to the space laws that to the laws that is already on Earth, like with international collaboration in the law sector. So did you always know that space law and policy was the career you wanted to move forward with?
Not really. I think for me it basically comes from the fact that I love sciences. I basically love sciences. I love applicable knowledge. So before the whole space thing came in, I was mostly concerned with computers. I love computers. I'm a retired hacker, and that was the kind of life that I had. My background was mostly in computers. However, in my second year of campus, I participated in the Manfred Lack Space Law Moot competition. I was in law school, and I participated in this competition in South Africa. My team emerged finalists in that competition, and coming from it, I realized that my fascination with stargazing and basically what's out there could actually be realized in the law. Uganda does not teach, my university, Makerere University at the time, does not teach space law or that kind of thing, but the research that went into the preparation for this competition helped open my eyes to a vast possibilities of space. And of course, it packed into my love for space-related things and science-related things. And I think that was the beginning of my journey as a space lawyer, and now going into space entrepreneurship.
That is great that you combined all of your passion together. You were in computer hacker, and then you came into law, and then in space law. So what part of your job excites you to keep coming back to it every day?
What kind of?
What part of your job excites you to keep coming back every day to it?
Oh, mentoring. A lot of my work involves mentoring. It involves, taking up new persons, and that's the most exciting thing I can say about my kind of work. I love working with people. I love working with youths. I love basically engaging different entities. So for me, it's mentoring. It's always the fact that I have a few, not a number, about four different persons or students that I've mentored to go into the whole area of space. And for me, that's a beautiful thing. It's the fact that knowing that uh, after you, there are people that are coming in and they are doing greatly. So for me, that's the most fascinating thing about my kind of work.
And how do you think privatization will help emerging nations to grow in the space sector?
Yes, privatization I think is very key because most of the emerging nations do not have the financial capabilities to invest heavily in space applications and space exploration and that kind of thing. So it would be very good for the public and private sectors to merge, to synergize and develop. The private sector can bring in the money while the public sector or the state can basically provide the general overseeing role. So I think that the private sector is very key in financing, in bearing the financial burden, while the state can recover and possibly at some point also start taking up some of its own key whatevers. And we see this, for example, the United States does this very well, that the private sector does handle a very, very huge burden of what would otherwise have been a very burdensome, endeavor. For example, NASA has an annual bill of about $10 billion, while its activities in a year may shoot way above the $10 billion mark. But working with companies like SpaceX and ULA and Rocket Labs, it can manage to remove a huge part of that burden that would otherwise go in research and development and that kind of thing, and then it will be able to invest that in other different areas and later on for so I think public-private partnerships would be very good for developing and emerging economies in order to foster the development in the space sector.
Okay, so you mentioned in your presentation that Uganda has an advantage because of its geolocation. So, like, where do you see Uganda in the next decade? Like, is that going to be an advantage for it, the location of the country?
I think it will be, but of course, it's a very tricky question because the geolocation, the GSO in itself, is beyond national repatriation and national appropriation in international law. No state can have conclusive rights over the GSO, but the location of Uganda can sort of give it leverage when it comes to launching its own. Though I don't think that in the next 10 years, judging by the technical capacity of the country, the next 10 years we do not expect to really use the GSO as it is, because the nature of the satellites that go to the GSO is quite complex, and most emerging nations should mostly focus on microsats and CubeSats and small satellites for small kind of applications. So in the next 10 years, I'm seeing Uganda with at least 5 satellites of its own. Notably, we are launching our first satellite before the end of 2022. And that will be an Earth observation satellite. And depending on the success of the entity, we'll see. But I'm saying that in the next 10 years, because there is now there's governmental will. The government is willing to invest. The government is willing to push this. So I'm thinking next 10 years, we are probably going to see quite a lot more. If we follow in the same trajectory that we are on, we are going to see quite a lot in that particular area.
And also, especially with people like you mentoring the young generation, I'm sure it's gonna go a lot ahead like it is now. So
Yes,
we are done with
yes.
the technical question. Now I'd like to go to the rapid fire round. We'll have some fun questions now. So,
Mm.
like, what is your favorite science fiction movie or series that inspired you?
Favorite science fiction. That's a hard one because I tend to love sci-fi movies a lot, but I do love the Star Wars trilogies. Um, I am mostly also into geeky kind of things, so you'll find me loving Harry Potter like a problem. I don't know how many times I've watched Harry Potter, but yeah, I'm also kind of in there, and so yeah, Star Wars. And Harry Potter. I think that would pretty much
Okay,
sum it up. Yes.
okay. And like, if you could visit one planet on the solar system other than Earth, which planet would you choose?
If I could.
Visit any planet on the solar system
Oh,
except Earth. Yeah,
ah, in the solar system, our solar system.
yeah, yeah.
That would probably be Mars. I think, yeah, that would
Okay.
probably be Mars. I've already been on Mars through the Ingenuity, rovers and that kind. So yes, that would be Mars. But of course, if it was the universe, I don't know. I am thinking of Proxima Centauri.
Okay,
I'd like to
okay.
visit. I'd like to see what it would be like there. I don't know. Though of
Yeah,
course,
that would be interesting.
I'll probably perish if I get there. But yes, it would be that Mars and Proxima.
So that was all the questions I had. And I actually
Mm,
got a
mm,
message from the team saying that audience are loving your sessions. They are loving all your questions. And they don't have any questions
mm.
as of now because I guess you're answering everything perfectly. So thank you so much for coming
Ah,
with us. I'm glad. I'm
mm.
glad, like, from the team of SDNx and Helium Learning Labs to have you on here, and you shared a lot of good things. You opened our eyes to a lot of stuff that is going on behind the scenes, like the laws and all. So thank you so much for coming here, sir. We look forward to hearing more from you.
Thank
Thank
you
you for
very
your
much.
time. Thank you for your time.
Thank you also for having me. I'm very, very grateful for the platform, and yeah, we hope to do this again and to have even
Yeah, sure,
more
sir.
spaces for this kind of conversation to happen. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Mr. David.
Mm. Yes.